things that has been failed to be exemplified by the teams of government. First of all, never did they try to clarify why restricting buildings of worship house is inherently rejecting the whole value of its religion. Second of all, never did they try to explain why their proposal is the most accommodative in comparison to our proposal when it comes to the accommodating many religions that exist within one country. If they want to say that the government is eventually dismissive kinds of government, then they should have been able to prove why dismissing one selfish interest of religion is not okay from the very first beginning. But moreover, if they say that this dismissal is not okay, then they should have explained why the dismissal of government coming because the government needs to consider many things before it comes to the buildings and infrastructure is not okay. We believe that our characterization of government is based on utility. That is fine. That is the most ideal kinds of government that we expect, because this ideal utility coming from the people's demand after calculations of interest coming from different religion. That is the thing that they need to prove. Several points of rebuttal before I come to my extension. First of all, they say that in response to our cases, they say that the government still limiting the ability for the people to do preaching, to do kinds of other thing, because because the government limit the constructions of worship house. This is the thing that this is the logic that we think is fail, and this is a logic that we think is error. The right logic is that the preaching is conducted because the building houses, because the worshiping houses has been constructed over there. Because we believe that when the worship house is established, then the preaching need to be conducted there. That's why that will be the cases when the worshiping house will run as it functions. We see that there's a kinds of logical error coming from the themes of proposition. But moreover, second of all, they say that the government is only ruling and prioritizing dominant religion. Let's say, for example, in case of Indonesia, the government most prioritizing the dominances of Islam. First responses, we say that it is okay to prioritize the dominance, ladies and gentlemen, because they are the dominant society. That's why their rebellion is something that needs to be avoided the most, ladies and gentlemen. But moreover, second of all, they say that never did they try to explain, they failed to explain why prioritizing majority will be inherently mean that minority will be disregarded, ladies and gentlemen, because it is even become worse condition when these kinds of worship houses is not limited, because this minority is also have tendencies to build their own kinds of worship houses freely and independently without any kinds of permissions coming from the government. What happens then? There will be more possibilities for dominant people who feel disrupted by this to even more do any kinds of things of rebellion. But moreover, ladies and gentlemen, the vice versa condition happen when the infrastructure, when the buildings of mosques, for example, when the worship buildings for the majority cannot be limited. We have to understand that they have more power to build even more and more. It will create even more dominances. That's why it needs to be restricted by the government. That's why we believe that it is very confusing coming from the proposition. Second point of rebuttal, in case of superiority, simply we don't understand what they mentioned by the superiority in the terms of religion to other religion. In the concept of religion, when we discuss the concept of religion, superiority only comes internally, based on who possess the most, who possess the understanding of value the most. That is never explained by the when it comes to other relations between other religion to other religion, we believe that there are no such thing as superiority. We are very confused in regards towards the case of superiority. But moreover, in status quo, evaluations for more numbers of worshipping house shows more dominantly in the terms of number, and we think that this superiority, which is based on which is portrayed the quantity, is not something that needs to be regretted. That's why we believe that every case is coming from the proposition has been failed from the very first beginning. In my extension, I'm going to prove why in our scenario the accommodations or the avoiding possibilities for conflict is more possibly to be achieved in our scenario. Let me exemplify it into one characterization of what happened in the status quo. In the status in the status quo, in several places, more particularly in Islamic country, let's say for example, in dominant Islamic country, let's say for example in Indonesia, there has been an escalating numbers of intersections conflict. There is an escalating numbers of intra-religions conflict, where the Islam itself has been segregated into smaller parties, into smaller component. We say that this kinds of thing will have big tendency to create even more more harm for these kinds of religion. But let's try to analyze why these kinds of segregation can happen. These kinds of segregation happen owing to the fact that each section has their interest to build their own home, exclusive home today for them to spread their value. Let's say for example, Muhammadiyah requires their own places. Nahdlatul Ulama requires its own places. Ahlus Sunnah wal Jamaah, Hizbut Tahrir, other Islamic parties requires their exclusive places to establish their kinds of worship house, so that they can be more exclusively spread the value that they possess. Ladies and gentlemen, each section has different places to spread their value, because these kinds of interest will be inherently this kind of interest is inherently not a kind of interest that needs to be accommodated by the government, because once these kinds of interest is accommodated more in the government, we see that segregation will even comes into a bigger bigger number. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, from the very first beginning, we believe that that's why government is going to be in charge, is going to be the main actors to limit these kinds of things. We say that make less numbers of building houses, make less of worship houses, will assemble the people in one kinds of places, so that the disseminations of different value that lead to segregation become less severe. We say that once there's a kinds of limited numbers of building house, these kinds of segregations will come into one place, so that the spreadings of other values, the spreadings of different value that in status quo leads to internal conflict inside of the religion will not going to be happen. But moreover, when it comes to the question, why it is important for the government to establish these kinds of peace? Because we believe that the government at the very first beginning is the most dominant actors and most responsible actors to ensure that there are no internal conflicts within their country. But moreover, when it comes to if the government team want to win these kinds of debate, then the very first thing that they need to prove is that their kind of proposal is going to be the proposal that is have more tendency to bring the peace, ladies and gentlemen, because we believe that the conflicts intra-religion and inter-religions happen because there's a kinds of selfish interest coming from different religion. Once it is not rationalized by the government, then these kinds of irrationality will come into more severe. That's why we believe that the government at the very first beginning is the dominant actor to ensure that the different interests coming within their within their country cannot be rationalized. That's why the peaceful conditions, the harmony conditions have been more established, and that's can only be achieved by our proposal. We're proud to oppose.